Chapter 4. From Civilian to Marine. Bootcamp. In the lobby of the Quincy Trailway bus station at 601 Hampshire, my parents said goodbye. As I stood anxiously waiting for the bus to load, Mom and Dad were by my side. Mom, being a typical mother, started to cry as she began hugging my waist, while Dad vigorously shook my hand and quietly said, "Son, make sure you write home to us." He was much too stoic of a man to show any public emotion, let alone a physical hug. I boarded the bus to St. Louis, Missouri for my Marine Corps induction with only a small duffel bag containing extra clothes, personal pictures, and toiletries. Sergeant Baker, a recruiter from the Quincy Marine Recruiting Station, accompanied me on the bus, likely to ensure I arrived safely and didn't have second thoughts. As we departed, he mentioned that 2 more recruits from Missouri would be joining us, both having enlisted in Quincy due to its proximity to a Marine recruiting facility. We crossed the bridge at Hannibal and picked up the first recruit, Frank Griggs, from Paris, Missouri. Then we continued south on Highway 61 until we reached Bowling Green, where John Stafford joined our group. The bus continued to drive on Highway 61 until we reached I-70, where we headed east towards St. Louis. We arrived at the old bus depot at 6th and Convention Street by the late afternoon. Sergeant Baker quickly got us off the bus, and we walked about 8 blocks south to the Mark Twain Hotel. After checking us in, Sergeant Baker gave us our final instructions. Report to the processing center at the Robert A. Young Federal Building on 1222 Spruce Street no later than 8 a.m., no exceptions. The induction center was 11 blocks south of the Mark Twain Hotel and just a few blocks west of Busch Stadium, home of the St. Louis Cardinals, with the iconic statue of Stan Musial out front. The Mark Twain Hotel, once a beacon of luxury, now stood as a shadow of its former glory, its vibrant history merely a whisper in the pages of time. Our rooms were cramped, barely fitting 2 full-size beds, and we had to share a communal bathroom at the end of the hallway. As typical 18-year-old boys, we didn't even notice the shabbiness until we realized there was no television or even a radio in the rooms. We decided to explore downtown St. Louis in search of some excitement beyond counting the cockroaches at the Mark Twain. The next day, we headed to the Federal Building for our induction into the Marines. All 3 of us had previously taken the required aptitude test used to assess job classifications, but now we had to undergo a brief yet crucial medical checkup. The center was bustling with inductees and uniformed men and women from all branches of the military who worked in the building. After passing our physical, we were led into a large room filled with anticipation as over 50 new recruits awaited the swearing-in ceremony. Suddenly, an Army sergeant entered holding a clipboard and announced the names of the draftees and which branch of the military they would serve in. He began calling out the anxious future recruits' last names in rapid succession. 20 men were informed they would be drafted into the Army, followed by 10 more entering the Navy. Some of the men cheered, while others groaned. 5 relieved recruits were welcomed into the Air Force, letting out a sigh of relief. Lastly, the sergeant announced the final 2 names, filling the quota for the Marines. A deadpan silence cloaked the room until several draftees gasped and began telling the 2 how badly they felt for them. Stafford, Griggs, and I exchanged uneasy glances, silently wondering how remorseful our future might become. A uniformed officer walked into the room to administer the oath of enlistment to everyone. Enlistees and draftees from every branch of the military stood together as we recited the same pledge. The American flag and flags representing each branch stood proudly in front of us. The officer in charge instructed us to raise our right hands to lead us in the U.S. military oath of allegiance, and so I did. I, Dan Allen Wagoner, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. After the ceremony concluded, we were ushered into separate rooms according to our respective branch of service. An atmosphere thick with anxious anticipation enveloped us as we geared up for the next phase of our journey. In total, only 5 Marine recruits were set to be transported to the St. Louis-Lambert Airport. A sergeant from St. Louis joined us, ensuring our smooth boarding onto a Trans World Airlines flight headed for California. This moment marked my inaugural experience in an aircraft, and certainly it wouldn't be my last. On the muggy night of July 10, 1968, my flight jerked to a stop on the runway of San Diego International Airport at around 8 p.m. Stepping off the plane, I was immediately hit by California's balmy, warm breeze, a sharp contrast to the smoky, stale air of the airplane cabin. No sooner had we stepped off the plane than a stern Marine drill instructor, DI, ushered me and the 4 other embryonic recruits toward the airport exit. Outside the terminal, under the harsh glare of airport floodlights, we were commanded to align ourselves by a solitary flagpole perched on a stark concrete island, wedged uncomfortably between the bustling road and the terminal's buzzing entrance. "You will stand at attention, ladies," the DI barked, his voice slicing through the balmy evening like a cold, sharp blade. "Feet at a 45-degree angle, heels kissing, hands flush against your sides, with thumbs parallel to your trouser seams. Eyes forward, head straight. Do not let your gaze wander, and do not fidget." And that's just what I did, for 1 solid hour, trying to stay statuesque and look like a Marine, facing the American flag, still hardly aware of the chaos that lay ahead. Throughout that seemingly endless evening, wave after wave of aircraft landed, each met by the stern figure of a Marine drill instructor. With every arrival, fresh groups of recruits were hastily corralled into our growing formation. Tension unmistakable, the air thick with anticipation, a military bus roared into view, disgorging 2 additional DIs who seemed even more formidable than the last. Now, with 3 drill instructors were weaving through our ranks, their voices thundering commands, and their presence electrifying the atmosphere. We were herded onto the base bus with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. The journey was brief, lasting mere minutes before the base emerged on the horizon after a short 4-mile stretch. As I peered out the window, the signage heralding Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, California, materialized into view. Majestic gates swung open, revealing a vast, expansive compound dotted with structures. The buildings bore a uniform palette of pale sand hues, their roofs a vibrant mosaic of brick-red tiles. Stucco walls dominated the landscape, interrupted only by wide arches that beckoned to serene walkways, weaving between and in front of the buildings. The architecture boasted an elegant flair, reminiscent of the luxurious resorts that were always beyond my family's monetary reach. A flicker of excitement stirred within me as I anticipated exploring my new quarters. "This place doesn't seem half bad," I mused silently. The bus screeched to a halt, and the 3 drill instructors hurried us off, barking orders at us. "Listen up. When I say move, I want to see elbows and assholes." With those motivating words, the DIs lined us up in front of the receiving barracks, a large building for indoctrination and processing into the Marine Corps. They herded us, not unlike cattle, one might cheekily note, to the yellow footprints of Agony Academy. It was there, under the steely gaze of authority, that I first spotted a sign above the receiving barracks door, a silent herald of the strict tenets of the recruit's creed. To be a Marine, you have to believe in yourself, your fellow Marine, your Corps, your country, your God, Semper Fidelis. As I snapped to attention, feet glued to the ground as if the very earth beneath me had turned to quick-drying cement, the gravity of my new reality began to descend with the subtleness of an anvil in an old cartoon. Gone were the days of whimsical sovereignty, where decisions like hamburger or hot dog formed the crux of my daily dilemmas. But amidst this newfound chaos, I clung to a glaring misconception. I believed, albeit briefly, that I had already earned the title of Marine. Alas, that badge of honor was not yet mine to wear. I was merely a recruit, a bottom feeder in the ocean of military rigor, yet to prove my mettle and earn the revered mantle of a United States Marine. And so my indoctrination into the Corps, or the crotch, as many of us would come to call it, began with these yellow footprints. It was past 10 p.m. before we finally got off them, only to be led as a flock of sheep to the barber shop inside the receiving barracks. Quickly and roughly the barber shaved each head, and it seemed just minutes until we all looked the same, our individuality gone in the piles of hair on the floor. With our freshly shaved heads gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, we shuffled into the open shower room like a herd of bewildered sheep. The space was nothing short of chaotic, with 8 spigots lined up along the wall, each promising a splash of cold water and a dash of humiliation. In this steamy battlefield we stripped down to our birthday suits, the air thick with a combination of anxiety and the faint scent of lye soap. Our brief respite from the chaos was abruptly cut short as we were herded out of the shower room like newly hatched chicks. With heads held high and spirits slightly dampened, we embraced our new reality. The Bald Brigade had officially been initiated, and there was no turning back now. As we shuffled hastily down the breezeway, our damp bodies barely concealed by the modest towels clinging to our waists, an air of mild apprehension swirled around us. Ushered into a cavernous supply room, we were each handed our inaugural set of government-issued finery. The collection was hardly fashionable but distinctly utilitarian, featuring charming white boxers affectionately dubbed skivvies, which promised a breezy freedom. This was complemented by olive green utility trousers, a sturdy web belt, a yellow sweatshirt, functional socks, and a pair of striking red sneakers. The transformation was swift as the drill instructors orchestrated the chaos. Clad in yellow sweatshirts emblazoned with the proud Marine globe and anchor, we were visually promoted from civilians to canaries, fluttering at the lowest rung of the Marine Corps ladder. Next, we were issued sea bags, a heavy-duty nylon bag with a shoulder strap to carry our gear in. After a DI explained what contraband was, several came by and checked our possessions. Personal items such as pocket knives, electric razors, gum, etc., were placed into a shoebox, addressed to our home, and neatly stacked against a wall for mailing. Even the tame-looking clerks were playing DI by yelling at us for something as mundane as moving into another line, where we were given our bucket issue. Nothing worth shouting about. A metal bucket, 2 sheets, a blanket, a pillow, and personal items such as a shaving kit and toothbrush, a scrub brush, and laundry detergent. Finally, at about 2 a.m., we found ourselves back on those eerie yellow footprints, still reeling from everything that had just happened. We dragged our heavy sea bags, buckets, and gear, moving aimlessly, and it felt like we were wandering forever. Exhausted, bewildered, and utterly defeated, I kept asking myself, what have I gotten myself into? In a strange, almost otherworldly place beneath the haunting glow of the moon, the sight of the domed metal structures spread out in front of us. Here stood the Quonset huts, their rounded tops shimmering with a cold light that seemed to mock the moon above. The lovely stucco walls and intricate red tiles we had admired had faded into mere memories, replaced by the stark, utilitarian shine of metal, tin roofs that reflected our own bald heads, creating an eerie connection to our new home. As I stepped inside the Quonset hut, Any initial charm started to fade away. Instead of welcoming cozy furniture, I was met with rows of metallic beds, standing rigidly like soldiers lined up for inspection. Each of us was assigned one of these bare-bones sleeping spots, a upper deck our lower bunk, and true to military style, we were quickly thrown into the routine of making our beds. We were in a race against the clock to cover those unforgiving racks with neatly arranged sheets and blankets, all within a strict 5-minute time frame. Our first taste of the precision that the military values so highly. As the command "lights out" echoed abruptly through the hut, I climbed into my newly made rack, a stark berth that felt more like a landing into a new reality. Lying there, in the velvety darkness of the Quonset hut, surrounded by the subtle symphony of my fellow recruits' breathing, and the occasional distant footstep of a watchful drill instructor, the weighty thought pressed on my mind, what indeed have I gotten myself into? The next morning I was jolted awake by the sound of a metal trash bin being kicked across the floor by one of our drill instructors. The clattering echoed through the early morning stillness like a thunderclap, and I shot up in my bunk, my heart racing. "Get out of those racks," the sergeant bellowed, his voice booming and unwavering. "You have 2 minutes to shit, shower, and shave." In a whirlwind of disoriented movement, we scrambled into the lavatory, bodies colliding and elbows jostling as we hastily undressed. The cramped space was filled with the sounds of rushing water and the frantic shuffling of feet as we stumbled into a frantic morning routine. We, the bleary-eyed heroes of Platoon 1041, emerged from the showers like a parade of zombies, weary from only 2 hours' sleep. Awaiting their prey were 3 Platoon 1049 drill instructors, donning their iconic Smokey the Bear hats that most distinctly marked their elite status among Marines. The wide-brimmed hats, unmistakable in their form, stood as proud emblems of the rigorous training regime and steadfast discipline that awaited us. At front and center was Gunnery Sergeant Gatton, our rather legendary platoon leader, who could have been mistaken for a walking, talking bulldog, compact, sturdy, and impossible to miss. His nose, which looked like it had been tenderized by a meat mallet, told tales of a man who liked to kiss trouble right on the lips. Standing beside Gunnery Sergeant Gatton was Sergeant Napier, who, despite being vertically challenged, carried himself with the kind of swagger you'd expect from a superhero, square chin thrust forward like the prow of a battleship. Sergeant Napier's cold blue eyes swept over us. The man had a stare so sharp you'd think his eyeballs were crafted by the finest Swiss Army knife makers, designed to dissect your very soul. Standing ominously near our Quonset hut door, where the sun doesn't dare shine and shadows of fear lurk, stood Staff Sergeant Keeler. Keeler's brow was so thick and woolly, I'm pretty sure it had its own ecosystem. This was a man who didn't just occupy space, he dominated it, casting shadows that had their own shadows. "Form up, recruits," Drill Instructor Gatton bellowed as we lined up on the street in front of 2 newly acquired homes. "Get in formation. What kind of sorry-ass excuse for Marines did they send us this time?" As all the DIs walked from recruit to recruit, they took pleasure in mocking each one of us. Some of the men, their heavy whiskers bearing testament to their lack of time management, were still bleeding from razor cuts with awkwardly pressed bits of toilet paper applied to their faces as a feeble attempt to stem the flow. The drill instructors seemed to delight in plucking the paper from their wounds, a cruel smirk dancing on their lips as they demanded perfection from us. Any missed patches of beard resulted in a swift reprimand and a humiliating trip back to the head lavatory for a proper shave. When the burly Sergeant Keeler reached me, he got right in my face, invading my personal space. "You missed some fuzz, puke," he spat, his breath hot and rancid. The harshness of his words sent a wave of embarrassment flooding through me, and I could feel the heat rising to my face. Just then, the shorter drill sergeant hurried over, his demeanor contrasting sharply with that of his beefy counterpart. He shouted, "Sergeant Keeler, don't you know hair doesn't grow on steel?" And thus the good cop, bad cop routine commenced, a dynamic that played out endlessly in our daily lives. I was promptly ordered to return to the barracks to shave again, my heart sinking at the thought of facing the sergeant's ridicule once more, my pride taking a crushing blow before the day had even really begun. Gunnery Sergeant Gatton began our introductory speech. "Listen up," he boomed, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "For the next 10 weeks I will be your mother, father, priest, and worst friend." His words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the journey we were about to embark on. "You are not yet Marines, and will not earn that title until you complete boot camp training," he continued, his tone tolerating no argument. As he spoke, I could feel the weight of his words sinking in. The boot camp experience would not merely be a physical challenge, it would be a transformation of identity. "Only the best of you will earn the title of United States Marine, and within a week, 20% of you will be dropped from this platoon," he warned, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed our nervous faces. The implication was clear. Failure was not an option. His stern warning underscored the seriousness of our new lives. Every word was designed to strip away the layers of our former selves, to break us down so that we could be rebuilt into something stronger, more disciplined, and more unified. The transformation into a Marine was not just a matter of physical endurance. It would require us to surrender our old identities completely and embrace the rigorous demands of this new life. The first morning unfolded with a session of light physical training designed to ease us into the rigorous routine that lay ahead. We began with a series of jumping jacks, their rhythmic cadence echoing through the early morning air, followed by forward bends that tested our flexibility and balance. Next came the squat thrusts, push-ups, and sit-ups, each exercise methodically pushing us to engage our muscles and focus our minds. The physical exertion awakened our bodies, but also ignited an urgent craving for sustenance. However, before we could satiate our appetites, we had to undergo our first lesson in military protocol, learning to march in unison to the mess hall. The DIs barked out commands with precision, their voices cutting through the morning stillness as we struggled to synchronize our movements. This was more than just a march. It was a rite of passage, a demonstration of our willingness to adapt to the military way of life. Finally, we reached the mess hall and lurched to an uncertain stop at Gunnery Sergeant Gatton's platoon halt, a command more grunt than clear words, which we were soon to find was typical of a drill instructor's vernacular. Eating our first Marine Corps breakfast was just as regimented as the process of getting to it. Gunny Gatton laid out the rules for us in a condescending manner, as if we were children. Take a tray, knife, fork, and spoon, and proceed down the line. Hold your tray directly in front of you. Keep your eyes forward with absolutely no talking. Take all you want, and eat all you take. No exceptions. After you get your food, proceed to the table where Staff Sergeant Keeler is standing. Assume the position of attention until everyone arrives to be seated. Do not take a seat until Sergeant Keeler gives the command. Then, our gunnery sergeant systematically led us into the mess hall, a squad at a time. After filling our trays, we rigidly stood before our table when the formidable Sergeant Keeler, with a voice that could slice through steel, commanded us to descend upon the benches. Seated like well-oiled machines, we moved in sync, settling into our seats with the precision of robots, our postures so exact they could have been measured with a protractor. No sooner had we arranged ourselves did drama unfold. A daring or perhaps foolish recruit, possibly overwhelmed by the enticing aromas or simply starving, prematurely seized his fork and dove headfirst into his meal. This anarchic act was met with the speed of a striking viper as Staff Sergeant Keeler descended upon him, bellowing in volcanic fury, Did I say you could eat yet, recruit? No one starts until I give the command. The air froze, thick with tension, until mercifully Sergeant Keeler allowed us to begin. Thus commenced our gastronomic adventure. We ate with mechanical efficiency, eyes dead ahead, forks marching in unison to and from our mouths. The atmosphere was punctured when tragedy struck. A fellow comrade's battle with his stomach was lost spectacularly as he redecorated his tray with the day's unappetizing fare, chipped beef, affectionately known as shit on a shingle. Without missing a beat, Sergeant Keeler was at our comrade's side, his voice booming like thunder. You're not leaving this table until that tray is spotless, and don't expect us to wait for you to finish, shitbird. What ensued was a scene of grim determination as the poor soul, under the watchful eyes of the platoon, commenced the revolting task of consuming his own spew. We bore witness, expressions frozen, trying to maintain composure and avert our gazes from the ghastly spectacle. The first week at boot camp is still vivid in my mind, a relentless test of our physical and mental limits. It was a whirlwind of physical training sessions that pushed us to our limits, close order drills where we perfected our marching and mastered the manual of arms, and a deep dive into the intricacies of military protocol. Every moment of every day, our drill instructors were omnipresent, their intense scrutiny never wavering. They had a mission, to break us down completely, to strip away our individuality and our egos along with it. The rationale was clear and harsh. We needed to stop thinking as individuals and start functioning as a cohesive unit. The platoon's needs overshadowed any personal desires we held, and the stark reality that any mistake by one man resulted in consequences for all hammered this point home. When errors were made, and they inevitably were, the punishment was invariably more physical training. Push-ups, squat bends, you name it, we did it, and we did it until even our DIs seemed to tire of watching us struggle. No effort was ever good enough. There was always something wrong. Maybe your back wasn't straight enough during push-ups, or perhaps your legs didn't kick back sufficiently during squat bends. And every time someone slipped up, the whole routine would start over. We'd hit the ground again, our muscles screaming, our lungs burning, but our determination hardening. During the initial processing week at boot camp, the shift from civilian to military life commenced with marked intensity. We were issued additional uniforms and received our first series of inoculation shots, a precautionary measure to protect our health against various potential threats. In addition to these personal adjustments, we were equipped with our 782 gear, which included vital field items such as a cartridge belt, canteens, and other necessary equipment for our training sessions. This gear was indispensable during the grueling long marches and extended periods exposed to the intense sun. The canteens, affixed to our cartridge belts, were especially crucial, enabling us to stay hydrated even in conditions where water sources were limited. However, access to our canteens was strictly regulated, always requiring the oversight and permission of the drill instructors. This relentless pursuit of perfection meant that if even one recruit faltered, the entire exercise would be restarted. Through this rigorous process, the more than 90 recruits quickly understood a fundamental lesson: the importance of collective achievement and the understanding that the platoon's efficacy was only as strong as its least proficient member. In the hallowed halls of boot camp, where the air is thick with the scent of discipline, we all seemed united by an unspoken pact: be as invisible as possible to the drill instructors. Contact was mostly avoided, as if avoiding eye contact with a T-Rex, hoping, mistakenly, that if we didn't move, they wouldn't notice us. But alas, human biology cares little for timing or tactical invisibility, and so it came to pass that one fateful day, Private Jenkins, spurred by the desperate calls of nature, ventured into the lion's den. With the courage of a lion, or the desperation of a man in dire need of relief, he approached the dragon's lair during our drill lesson to plead his case. The air was thick with tension as he bellowed out a request. "Sir, Private Jenkins, Platoon 1041. Request permission to speak to the drill instructor, sir." The response was swift and unforgiving. "What is it, shitbird?" came the growl from the abyss. "Sir, I have to go to the bathroom, sir," Jenkins squeaked, his voice cracking under the pressure. "What did you just say? Did use the term I?" the drill instructor thundered, seizing upon the slip with the delight of a cat cornering a mouse. "Sir, what do you want me to say, sir?" Jenkins stuttered, clearly entangled in a verbal spiderweb. Sadly, the tortured recruit said the word you. "You? Do I look like a female sheep boy?" the sergeant shot back, a wicked twinkle in his eye as he watched Jenkins squirm. As this Shakespearean comedy unfolded, I stood there, a silent observer in the ranks, internally praising every celestial body that the gods of misfortune had chosen Jenkins as their plaything at that moment. Not I, Private Wagoner. During the initial stage of training, referred to as Phase 1, there was a focus on rigorous physical conditioning. This included an intensive regimen of running, push-ups, and navigating a challenging obstacle course designed to push our physical limits. The first phase also encompassed foundational lessons in combat skills, equipping us with basic combat techniques essential for survival if or when we were sent to Vietnam. As we marched each day, the drill instructor would yell at anyone who fell out of step, ensuring everyone was precise in their movements. Ah, the delightful chaos of boot camp, where one thing was for sure, our blunders kept us there indefinitely, or at least until we could march without resembling a bunch of baby geese trying to keep up with its mother. I remember one particular day when we were all scrambling to nail our drill routines, and I used nail as loosely as my grandma's dentures on a roller coaster, when suddenly the air was pierced by the booming voice of Staff Sergeant Keeler. He was barking at someone who was bouncing around like a yo-yo on a sugar rush. As his voice grew louder, we all silently wished, "Please let it be Kearney, Bean, or even Private Jenkins, anyone but me." As Sergeant Keeler grew nearer, my heart was dropping faster than a thermometer in Fargo, Minnesota during December. "Private Wagoner, can't you follow basic instructions? Stop bouncing around like you're on a pogo stick, knucklehead." And then, whoomp! His powerful fist connected right between my shoulder blades, a hit that could have registered on the Richter scale. "Wagoner, if I see you bopping up and down again, I'll drive you into the ground like a tent peg." There I was, stunned, thinking, well, holy moly, Staff Sergeant Keeler not only knows who I am, but has also decided I'm his personal project. From then on, everyone called me Private Pogo, the recruit who could effortlessly turn any drill practice into a scene straight out of a comedy show. During Phase 2, we were permitted to wear our utility shirts and were no longer required to always wear the yellow sweatshirts. At least we were no longer referred to as canaries. The DIs intensified their regime, leveraging physical training not just as a group deterrent, but as personal retribution too. This punitive measure often unfolded in the secluded grass patch, nestled between the Quonset huts. Shielded from prying eyes, this spot earned the notorious nickname, the Pit. Here, countless recruits grappled with grueling bend thrusts and push-ups, all under the radar of the higher command's watchful gaze. To gauge our advancement, each recruit faced an initial physical fitness examination mirroring the rigorous standards required for graduation. This daunting challenge included a series of push-ups, sit-ups, chin-ups, squat bends, and a grueling 3-mile run, each adhering to stringent time constraints and minimum repetition thresholds. Those who found these tasks daunting, often due to issues with weight or insufficient strength, were humorously yet sympathetically assigned to a dedicated unit known colloquially as the pig farm. The stakes of falling behind were high. Being sent back meant restarting your training from the point of failure. Naturally, no one was eager to endure even a single extra day in the relentless grind of Marine Corps boot camp. Mail call in boot camp was like the Oscars for us homesick rookies. Imagine a bunch of young guys, ages away from their last home-cooked meal, vibrating like jack-in-the-boxes every day at precisely 9 p.m. Why? Because that's when our drill instructor, who fancied himself the host of this daily drama, would theatrically bellow, "On the road in mail call formation." Suddenly, every Quonset hut would burst into life, echoing the command like a game of broken telephone. Oh, the letters. Some guys received envelopes thick with the scent of perfume, drenched in so much fragrance you'd think they were trying to mask the smell of despair that permeated our barracks. The DI would wave these aromatic letters like a flag, often leaving a cloud of eau de longing in the air, and then tease the poor recipient with a comment so embarrassing it could make a tomato blush. And the lipstick-laden love notes? Those were treated like rare artifacts. The DI would hold them up for everyone to see, leaving the poor guy whose name was called out to turn the color of the lipstick smudge Crimson Crush, I believe. As for me, I was the sad sap who, day after hopeful day, only received letters from my dear mother. Don't get me wrong, Mom's words were comforting, but they didn't quite have the same thrill as those scented or lipstick-kissed envelopes my comrades flaunted. Each letter from Mom was a tender reminder of home, yet each also echoed the absence of a certain Jessica, whose letters I longed for but never received. Every empty-handed evening, I couldn't help but feel a sting of jealousy, watching others bask in the glow of their romantic correspondence while I stood there clutching Mom's latest casserole recipe. Learning bayonet fighting is a crucial part of a Marine's combat training. We were taught how to lunge, thrust, and jab with the bayonet using a pugil stick, which is a pole the same length as an M14 rifle and heavily padded on both ends. We were issued football helmets and practiced our moves as if we were fighting with a fixed bayonet on a rifle. Two recruits would face off in a ring about 20 feet in diameter, attacking each other until the instructor determined a death blow. The sticks were heavy and could cause significant damage, so the helmets provided some protection. This was an event that everyone enjoyed and gave us a chance to release our pent-up aggression. It was a way to let out the frustration of enduring weeks of our DI's antagonism by bashing a fellow recruit with a pugil stick. Picture this: a sunny day, a wooden stage, and a bunch of us Marine recruits circled around the platform like we're at summer camp waiting for a magician to make a rabbit appear. Only there's no magic here, just the harsh reality of hand-to-hand combat training, where the only rabbits are us, about to learn how to hop out of dangerous situations. Our instructor, who might as well have been a drill sergeant turned circus ringmaster, stood on his wooden arena and surveyed his audience with a look that said, "I'm going to turn you buttercups into bruise blossoms." The setting was perfect, just enough breeze for dramatic effect and the suspense of imminent bodily harm hanging in the air. As we sat near the stage, probably staining our pants and thinking about the laundry horrors later, our beloved instructor called for a volunteer. You could almost hear the collective gulp as no one moved a muscle. It was the kind of silence where even a sneeze would have felt like a betrayal. That's when he zeroed in on Private Zipperer, our resident gentle giant, who looked like he could bench press a small elephant but had the heart of a teddy bear. Private Zipperer lumbered onto the stage, his face a mixture of "why me" and "let's get this over with." As one of our respected squad leaders, he was a mountain of a man, the kind you'd pick first for dodgeball, but last for hide and seek. But as soon as the demonstration started, it became clear that our mountain man had the defensive stability of a sandcastle. Our instructor, who fancied himself a bit of a comedian, began showing us how even the mightiest can be toppled with the right moves. With each judo chop and quick blow, Private Zipperer wobbled and bobbed like one of those inflatable clown punching bags. Each time he hit the deck and then stood back up, you could see the resolve in his eyes, mixed with a slight reevaluation of his invulnerability. Pulling punches must have been instructor code for "I'm going to make you wish you'd volunteered to do laundry instead," because each whack echoed around the field. By the end of the lesson, we weren't sure what was more bruised, our sides from holding back laughter or Private Zipperer from not holding back at all. By the end, Private Zipperer had earned more than just our respect. He'd earned the right to never volunteer for anything ever again in his life. And as for the rest of us, we walked away with a newfound respect for Pert Zipperer and his indomitable courage. In combat, the most important rule was that there were no rules. We were taught that fairness did not exist in a fight where the consequence of losing was death. We were expected to do whatever it took to win, whether that meant using a bayonet, biting, or even gouging out an opponent's eyes. Any object that could give us an advantage was fair game, including rifle butts, e-tools, helmets, or anything that could harm the enemy. We were trained to use the palm of our hands to drive an enemy's nose cartilage into their brain and to pull out their windpipe, leaving them gasping for air. In a battle for our lives, nothing was off limits. It was simply a matter of kill or be killed. When the Marine trainers announced it was chokehold day, you could feel the excitement and the anxiety thicken the air like humidity before a storm. We were essentially turning into human constrictor snakes, tasked with artfully pressing the snooze button on our partner's consciousness. The thrill of the exercise was unmistakable, dancing delicately on the razor's edge between effective incapacitation and an unplanned visit to see a corpsman. We were instructed to loosen our iron grips just as our buddies' eyes started fluttering like trapped butterflies, not a moment too soon or too late. Miraculously, everyone woke up from this dangerous nap on their own, with no resuscitations required, turning a potentially fatal handshake into a heart-pounding learning experience. The somber truth that one could end a life using mere physical force was a profoundly unsettling notion to confront. This weighty realization underscored the primal nature of the survival instincts embedded within us. As I absorbed these teachings, I wasn't fully aware of the dire circumstances in which such knowledge might be necessary. I found myself earnestly praying that such a day would never come. The second phase of boot camp took place at Edson Range in Camp Pendleton, about 45 miles north of San Diego, where we received rifle training and marksmanship qualification. During this phase, we were allowed to blouse our boots and unbutton the top of our shirts, finally starting to resemble true Marines. I had never fired a weapon before joining the Marine Corps, so everything about shooting was entirely new to me. Because every Marine is fundamentally a rifleman, the Corps made sure that all troops qualified on the range. In fact, in order to graduate boot camp, I would need to qualify. During the first week at Edson Range, we focused on snapping in. This involved learning the proper techniques for holding and aiming our weapons to prepare for shooting. We practiced with empty rifles, forming a large circle around miniature targets in what was known as the snapping in circle. Here we were taught how to adjust the sights and hold the rifle correctly for different shooting distances. We spent a significant amount of time dry shooting and mastering the prone, sitting, kneeling, and standing positions. Learning to squeeze the trigger without jerking required concentration and practice. The shooting range was overseen by a range officer who was responsible for all operations. In addition, a safety officer was tasked with ensuring that all safety protocols were followed. Recruits were accompanied by shooting coaches, while drill instructors observed from a distance while on the firing range. On the final Friday of training, recruits faced qualification day. To pass, they needed to score at least 190 out of 250 points on a 48-inch diameter target with 3 rings. I finished with a score of 205, just 5 points below sharpshooter. Despite only being a marksman, I was relieved to have avoided the wrath of the DIs and earned a badge, allowing me to graduate on time. On September 2nd, we returned to MCRD San Diego to begin Phase 3 of our training, with only 2 weeks remaining before completing boot camp. It was starting to seem like I would finally make it through. I was sitting on my footlocker, diligently polishing my boots when Private Jenkins burst through the Quonset hut door. "Wagoner, you're needed at the duty hut right away." My stomach churned with anxiety as I wondered what trouble I had gotten myself into. Visits to the DI's duty hut were never a good sign. When I arrived at the duty hut, I knocked loudly on the hatch and shouted, "Sir, Private Wagoner requests permission to enter the duty hut, sir." "Do I hear a woodpecker?" Gunnery Sergeant Gatton bellowed back. I repeated my request as loudly as I could. "Sir, Private Wagoner requests permission to enter the duty hut, sir." "Enter, Private." As I stepped through the doorway, I spotted a towering black man standing at attention. I quickly clicked my heels together and stood at attention beside him. "Sir, Private Wagoner reporting as ordered, sir." "Private Wagoner, meet Private Ferguson. He's just joined Platoon 1041 after spending 2 weeks in the Academic Instruction Platoon. He'll need your help to graduate. Private Ferguson is now your responsibility, Private Wagoner. You will tutor him and ensure he passes our written exams. Do I make myself clear?" "Sir, yes, sir." For the next 2 weeks, I spent my free time preparing Private Ferguson for the exams. He had a wonderful disposition, friendly, and always thankful for my support. Ferguson, who was as big as a freight train, would almost come to tears when he couldn't remember his general orders, but he was always willing to put in the work. After the command "lights out," at night time we would cover the Quonset hut windows with blankets and turn the lights back on to study. Although it was against boot camp rules, the drill instructors were aware of it and even wanted us to do it. When Private Ferguson would fail a test, Gunny Gatton called me into the duty hut and invited me to watch TV. However, I had to endure watching the Johnny Carson show while holding a push-up position. I will always remember Private Ferguson as a good friend. His unwavering determination to become a Marine inspired me to find new ways to help him succeed. One effective approach was to acknowledge and praise his progress when he answered my questions correctly. This seemed to motivate him to keep working. Success in these tests was not merely a matter of personal achievement, but crucial in determining whether our platoon could contend for the prestigious Honor Platoon Award. This accolade was emblematic of exemplary performance and collective discipline, and securing it was a testament to the proficiency and cohesion of a platoon. The day marked for physical training evaluation had arrived, an occasion I had been eagerly anticipating. We were required to do our 3-mile run in under 24 minutes. This was not a problem for me, and I looked forward to the event. However, my enthusiasm was significantly tempered by an unfortunate incident the previous day, a sprained ankle sustained during a run on the obstacle course. This injury presented a considerable challenge, as every movement was now accompanied by sharp, piercing pain. Despite the discomfort, I was determined not to let this physical setback impede my progress. With each painful step, I concentrated intently on my breathing patterns and the sound of my footsteps resonating against the hard pavement. The goal seemed dauntingly distant. Nevertheless, I persevered, advancing steadily, one painstaking step after another. As I approached the last stretch of the run, an intense determination overtook me. Tapping into a well of strength I hadn't realized I possessed, I surged forward, accelerating into a full sprint towards the finish line. The moment I crossed it, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion overwhelm me, and I found myself collapsing onto the ground. There I lay breathless, grasping my swollen ankle, overwhelmed by both the physical agony and the emotional intensity of the moment. But as I looked up, I saw my gunnery sergeant Gatton standing over me, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. "You've got guts, kid," he said, offering me a hand up. "You may not be the best shot, but you've got heart. That counts for something in my book." I smiled through the pain, knowing that I had earned a small victory, despite the odds stacked against me. And as I hobbled away, I knew that I had the resilience and determination to overcome any obstacle that stood in my way. The final inspection before graduation was with the commanding officer and was crucial for our platoon's ranking within the Bootcamp series. Our performance during the inspection reflected on the drill instructors and how well they trained us. Everyone made sure to look their best with spit-shined shoes, highly polished brass, and perfectly pressed khaki uniforms. As we stood at attention, the base battalion commander, the series sergeant major, and platoon commander Gunnery Sergeant Gatton walked through our ranks, asking military training questions and inspecting our appearance. When they stopped in front of me, Lieutenant Colonel Walker's eyes scanned me from head to feet and then started asking a few questions. "What's your second general order, Private?" he asked. "Sir, the private's second general order is to walk my post in a military manner, keeping always on the alert and observing everything that takes place within sight and hearing, sir," I replied. "Private, what's the muzzle velocity of the M14 rifle?" he inquired. "Sir, the muzzle velocity of the M14 rifle is 2,800 feet per second, sir," I answered confidently. The battalion commander briskly turned and started walking towards the next recruit. I felt a wave of relief knowing I had answered all his questions satisfactorily. However, my heart sank when Colonel Walker stopped and turned back to face me again. The stern officer then rolled up his sleeve and displayed a gold watch on his wrist. "Private, I forgot my glasses." "What time is it?" he asked. "Sir, 3 o'clock, sir," I quickly replied. As soon as these words slipped from my mouth, I realized my mistake. In military time, it was 1500. I noticed the angry expression in Gunnery Sergeant Gatton's eyes. I was in trouble. That evening, I found myself in the pit, the veiled area between Quonset huts reserved for punitive punishment like endless squat thrusts. The next day, Platoon 1041 stood tall and proud in our dress uniforms to begin boot camp graduation. The ceremony began with a pass and review as we marched behind the base band, cheered on by our families. When the band played the Marines hymn, I was filled with emotion at the realization of becoming a Marine. Our formation came to a halt, and we smartly turned to face our guests and the battalion commander. The colonel spoke about duty, honor, and the Marine Corps. His closing words of, "You are now a United States Marine," are etched in my memory as one of my proudest moments. The 10-week ordeal seemed worth every second to hear those 7 significant words. We threw our barracks covers high in the air and let out a loud cheer at our accomplishment. Now, I could proudly wear the Marine Corps globe and anchor device, which remains one of my greatest accomplishments to this day. The ceremony concluded with the national anthem and the retiring of the colors. After we marched off the parade field, most were met with hugs and tears of joy from their families. It was a moment of pride and accomplishment, knowing that we had earned the title of United States Marine. Everyone was given the rest of the day to spend with their families. For me, a sense of melancholy and isolation settled in. Among the 90 Marines graduating, only 3 of us were without family in attendance. As the shadows lengthened across the courtyard at MCRD San Diego, a somber mood settled over me. The air, thick with excitement and anticipation for others, seemed to suffocate me with a growing sense of isolation. One by one, I watched as my comrades' faces transformed with delight at the sight of their parents, siblings, and significant others embracing them, their happiness overwhelming them. Each reunion was a poignant reminder of what was missing in my own life. My parents, whom I missed with an intensity that ached, could not be here. I stood there in silence, enveloped in an overwhelming loneliness. On the last evening at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, Gunnery Sergeant Gatton, accompanied by Staff Sergeant Keeler and Sergeant Napier, gathered all of us into a cohesive circle around them. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy as we stood waiting. Once everyone was positioned, Gunnery Sergeant Gatton, with a stern but proud look, began to methodically call out our names one by one. As each name was announced, he also revealed our future roles in the Marine Corps by stating our assigned military occupation specialty. The room filled with a mixture of emotions as each recruit learned of their upcoming responsibilities and potential deployments. The process continued smoothly until the letter W was reached. When Gunnery Sergeant Gatton called out Wagoner, there was a brief pause. Then, in a firm and unchanging tone, he announced my MOS, 0311 Infantry. At that defining moment, the sheer reality of my imminent future crystallized before me. After we dispersed from our roll call, I found myself deep in thought, contemplating the arduous journey ahead, fully cognizant of the plethora of challenges and demands that awaited me, poised to step into a conflict that was shaping my generation, especially those of us who would go into battle. Yet the moment to set foot in Vietnam was still on the horizon. At Camp Pendleton, California, I would have 7 more weeks of infantry training.